Good afternoon. Thank you, Ian. The city doesn't sleep. I don't seem to sleep these days either, but that's all right. Ambassador Cronin, what an honor to be able to share a stage with you as well. And we truly appreciate the way you're a champion for the Biden administration and telling the rest of the world, particularly here in Ireland, all the great assets we have as allies in America. We're always standing with our friends, particularly here in Ireland. So thank you, Ambassador Cronin. I also want to give a shout out to someone I served in Congress with during that chapter of my career. Very happy I'm where I am today. And that is Congressman Joe Crowley, if he's in the room. As the proud granddaughter of County Kerry, I must say it's quite an honor to return here. It's an honor of a lifetime to return here as governor of the great state of New York. And I'm captivated by these images behind us that just remind us of how much it must have been so difficult for people to leave the beauty and majesty of here. Those who had to leave, like my grandparents, surely did it out of great necessity, not desire, but also a necessity to leave here, because otherwise it's hard to imagine why anyone would leave. But people left here. People left here in search of a better life for many, many decades, and they often found their way to cities. There's a County Cork native, and actually he's an artist, but artist Hugh Lane once said, "The city is the greatest work of art imaginable." And that's a beautiful way to imagine a city, as a work of art. In my mind, an ever-evolving work of art, but something that is to be cherished. In my home state, we owe much to the Americans who came from Ireland, Irish Americans. And it was actually 200 years ago that the Great Erie Canal was built with thousands of Irish Americans in search of a job. What the digging of that ditch did was transform a little sleepy village, New York City, small harbor, into an economic powerhouse as it opened up new markets from Europe to go to New York City but find their way up the Erie Canal, which created scores and scores of city in its path. Literally one every 10 miles, because that was the distance you needed before the mule needed to rest. And they would build homes there and stables there and places, boarding houses for people to stay. But it opened up the Midwest, and the grain and the products that later flowed from that region over to this New York City and out to Europe was an extraordinary engineering achievement that was only successful because of the hard work of Irish who left here and found their way there. So we're always cognizant that we literally are celebrating the 100th anniversary. Among those who left, as I mentioned, were my grandparents. They found their way to another city at first, Chicago, where many Irish found their way. They had nothing. They had dreams, a little bit of lint in their pockets, I presume, but nothing else. They were teenagers. Literally were told by their families they would have to leave because they could not afford to feed such a large family here. Devastating for all, but it led them to come to a new place, a place of opportunity. And they found their way not just to Chicago, but they moved to Buffalo, another city, because of the opportunities making steel. My grandfather became a steel worker, as did my father and his brothers and others. So that was the American dream that was achieved by many who left this region. But it was also hard for them to leave as well, which is why this return for me was so incredibly special, to be reconnected with family, some I'd never met before. But the generations who still speak so fondly of those teenagers who left many, many years ago was really powerful for me. And their story was not uncommon. But what also reminds me is that when I think about what makes our cities so great, yes, the buildings can be extraordinary. You can have cultural institutions, you can have theater, you have great playwrights here, George Bernard Shaw and others. But it's also the people. It truly is the people. And that sounds cliche and simplistic, but it's not. The people provide the talent, the ideas, the creativity that can transform cities into machines of innovation and places of opportunity like nothing else can. So what we want to continue to do is have cities that draw the most ambitious, the boldest, those who are the most likely to be risk takers, like anyone who leaves the security of a home country. Those are the risk takers that have made America what it is. People from all over the world. And people wonder why America is the way it is, a hotbed of great innovation. I've always thought that it was the fact that in order to leave the security of your home and your family, there had to be something in you that pushed you to take that extreme risk. And as a result, my home country now benefits from all that. And cities must continue today to have that talent. So we talk about not the history that I quickly gave you, but the future of our cities, because it's the talent that creates the energy and the dynamism that is necessary for our cities. There's a 2021 book called The Survival of the City. Authors Edward Glaser and David Cutler say, cities are humanity's greatest invention, engines of creativity, innovation, wealth, and connection. If you break down each and every one of those words, each one stands for something that isolated, they do not add up to what we have in our great cities today. But together, it is a powerful force that must be cherished and never taken for granted, that'll always endure the way it does now. And not forget that people are the electricity that power the economic engines. They come into our cities, they work there, but then they enjoy the nightlife, they build families, they build connections. So we have threats to that right now. Anyone who refuses to acknowledge that is not being honest with their constituents, the people of their country or their states. We have challenges. We have crime. We have chronic homelessness. And some of those will drive people from wanting to live in that environment, either to go in the first place or to stay. I will say in the state of New York, we acknowledge this. And since I've been governor for 2 years, we've taken aggressive steps to combat both of those challenges. They're not unique to New York, but they seem to be associated with more cities likely than not. But there's other existential threats that challenge the vitality of our cities. Let's talk about them. Skyrocketing housing costs, overcrowded roads, insufficient mass transit, and the vulnerability of catastrophic shocks like climate change and pandemics. These are the push factors that drive people from our cities and deter others from even coming. As a foundational element of a city, the city must feel and be safe. And like I said, we've reduced violent crime to pre-pandemic levels in New York, but like all cities, all states, there's much more to do. But my concern is we have a domino effect. If people leave, we lose tax revenues, we lose the small businesses that support them, and I say that businesses, our civic leaders, government leaders must all work together to foresaw this. So this gathering is particularly important at this time. We just saw the vulnerability of cities. We saw what happened when we were hit so hard with that pandemic. And I'm proud, I'm an optimist, I truly am. New York has always been a place of great visionaries, people who turn the impossible into the possible. And I benefit from that legacy. But before I get into some of the effects we're feeling, I'd like to just tell you what I'll be doing, and I'm going to be outlining what we've done in New York and how we can extrapolate some of those lessons for other cities on how to make them more affordable, more livable, and ultimately more resilient. So we can cultivate the talent, keep the talent, draw the talent that is so necessary to take us to the next level. So I'm willing to do this. I've taken these issues on back home. I'm happy to talk about them here. And I don't need to introduce any of you to New York City, do I? You've all heard it, okay? It's one of the most iconic cities. It's the 10th largest economy in the world. And for our home state, it is the economic engine that powers 60% of our GDP. And that's why the health of our largest city affects the health of our state and truly the health of our nation. But in 2020, when we came face to face with one of the greatest vulnerabilities of cities, a global pandemic, the likes of which we had not seen for over 100 years, it attacked the very essence of cities like New York. Why? Because in a place like New York, it's all about the density. People live in tall buildings and high rises. They take subways. They're smashed together. They go shoulder to shoulder walking down the streets. You sit in restaurants this far apart. You're in elevators that are packed. That's what a vibrant city is all about, that's packed with people. But when there is a global pandemic and proximity to others can spread it, it eats at the very core of what made the city great or makes any city great. So that's what we had to deal with. And what happened was the density the fear of illness, the ever prevalence of death, drove people from the cities, those who could. Many could not. But those who could retreat to other parts of the state or go to vacation homes or find homes elsewhere, they left. They left. And what has happened, because one would think, well, it's over now. We had vaccinations, right? We're good. No one talks about it anymore. What happened at the same time as people leaving initially temporarily was the rise and advent of remote work. Now, when I first became governor, I'd been on the job 2 months, and I was asked by a major business organization, ABNY, Association for Better New York, created in the 1970s when people were looking for a lifeline. The city was in rapid decline. This group asked me what I thought New York needed to come back. I said, outlaw Zoom. Sorry, Zoom people, if you're investors, but you think about it, that gave an opportunity for people to say, no, I'll just keep working here. I'm good. I don't have to do laundry. I'm wearing the same pajamas every day. I live in the basement. Yeah, I'm good. So it created this change in humans' expectations of their workplace. And employers who had to be competitive, because I said employers will tell everybody they have to be back 5 days a week. Just everybody jump off the cliff together, right? But others, well, most of my staff wants to stay home, or 2 days, or up to 3 days. I speak to business leaders in New York City every day of the week, like, well, we're up to 4 days. It's not 5. We're not there yet. And this is something we're challenged with here. A lot of businesses didn't survive. The shoe shine person, little bodega, the little grocery store, it had a huge effect on Midtown Manhattan, where my office is. It used to be so crowded to walk the streets. I don't like the fact that it's not crowded. That's because these office buildings, built to handle thousands and thousands of workers, many are back, others are not at all, and then there's this group in the middle that are maybe 20 to 40% occupied, but that's even before long-term leases expire. Our fear is when those leases expire, and people do have the opportunity to have a workforce of 2 days of work for this group, 3 days for this, they won't need the same space anymore. So what that'll do is create a real problem when mortgages can't be paid and the banks take over. We see that coming right now. So that ripple effect of people not coming in 5 days a week has the potential to create great dead zones in the heart of our urban core. That challenge must be met by the business community and government, and it's something I just took on in our state budget, $237 billion budget we approved 1 month ago. And I'll talk about that when I talk about housing, about how we said we have to reimagine the use of these buildings. They cannot lay vacant in the heart of downtown. We also are trying to entice people to return, the people, the businesses, but at the same time, we're making progress there. At the same time, housing became so much more expensive. Talk about being conspired against here. If housing had been what it was a decade ago and didn't escalate and interest rates didn't go up and capital to build a housing wasn't so high, we could have kept building, at least the places that were building. Many still refuse to build. It's another whole topic. But it's not just New York City at all, or the other cities across the state of New York. This week, I spoke with the mayors of Dublin, London, Rome, even in speaking with the Prime Minister here, the Taoiseach. I asked every one of them, what's your biggest challenge? What are you most worried about? What's going on? Every one of them said, it's the housing crisis. Every one of them. 5 years ago, they wouldn't have said that. 3 years ago, they might not have said that. So it is top of mind for every leader of every major city. So that's a big challenge. In a recent study of 200 cities across the globe, it said that 90% were found to be unaffordable, the average home costing three times more than the average income. How does that work? It means you're not buying a home. You're probably not even able to rent one. And it's magnified in metropolitan areas because there's just not enough. Now, one more thing I'm going to throw into the mix. You thought it couldn't get any worse, right? We also are experiencing the largest migration of humanity since World War II. Every city is experiencing people fleeing, whether they're climate refugees because they're leaving their farms because what they used to grow there, the crops are being destroyed, it doesn't work, fleeing persecution, political, economic challenges. Whatever city you were talking to, there's a huge influx of individuals coming. Now, what does that do? It requires resources. Our state just allocated $2.4 billion in our budget to assist the mayor of New York, who's spending at least that much to house the migrants that have newly arrived in New York City. But ultimately, what do they need? Those who are staying. They need housing. I just told you, we already have a housing crisis. It's not going to work. So high prices drive out the talent. People go elsewhere. And the cities find it challenging to be these innovators. So what I say is this. Political leaders need to find the courage to stand up to the entrenched interests, and there are many, break through NIMBYism, something we know a lot about in the state of New York, overcome the elected officials who say, I don't want any change, I don't want to disrupt things, I might not win my next election, I don't want to antagonize anybody, heaven forbid. You have to break through and show some courage. This is the moment that all elected leaders around this world are called upon to be the leaders that this moment calls for. And they have to champion new housing development. There's a lot of creative ideas. We're talking about 3D printing homes. I've not seen one. I hope it holds up. But I'm intrigued by this. I want to find through technology how we can innovate faster, cheaper, more economical homes and put them everywhere. That's how we can start dealing with this. But also, we approach it with an all-the-above idea. We have vertical opportunities. We can always go upward in New York. You can see, if you haven't been there in a few years, it is unrecognizable how high the buildings have become. But they're very narrow. And you say, why are they such narrow buildings? Well, because we had zoning restrictions in place since the 1970s that limited the density. Okay, it doesn't make sense. We have more people, more demand. We have to go up. But there's local zoning laws that say we can't. So that's one of the issues we tackled. The mayor wants it fixed. The state has control. I said we're going to fix this. So we have to lift the bureaucratic red tape. We have to do so much more. And what we can do, if we can make this happen, we can make those areas that are under stress right now 24/7 places where people can live and work. But we just have to open our minds to the possibilities. Empty office towers should become homes that are affordable. I'm not just talking about affordable homes, low-income housing. I'm talking about in one building, everything, from luxury at the top to market rate to affordable to low. We can do it, and you can still put parking in the same building. It costs money, and this is where government has to play a role. We have to give the tax incentives to make it all add up, or guess what? The developers will just say, I'll wait this decade out. I'll go back to Florida, I'll come back when it's more affordable to do this, or when interest rates come down, or when capital is more accessible. To help, the state of New York just put aside $650 million to provide for the building of housing on state-owned properties. Now, if you want to survey the state of New York, I found housing space everywhere. Look at a parking lot next to a train station. Transit-oriented development makes all the sense, doesn't it? People won't have to have a car. You can build a housing unit, multi-family housing, right in the space of a parking lot, which has tumbleweed at the end of the day when all the commuters are done using the train station, right? Well, of course, the local residents would rather see the tumbleweed. Okay, I get that. But I'm proposing a livable building, not just people living in it, but you can have businesses on the first floor and get a cup of coffee as you're heading off to the station. So we're going to be incentivizing $650 million worth of development, whether it's former jails, former psychiatric centers, our college campuses have extra space. I am inventorying every inch of space I can in the state of New York because I will do what I can to get more housing built. We also stop price gouging, discrimination, unfair evictions as well. But that's our housing crisis. Spent a lot of time on that because that is top of mind when I talk to the mayors of the world's most iconic and well-known cities. But also making cities more livable means fewer cars on the roads, reducing pollution, and bolstering mass transit systems. Now, truth is, there's endless gridlock everywhere. There's no reliable alternatives. And that's why we have to continue to make investments in the next generation of urban mobility, modernizing the trains and subways, supporting multimodal integration so people can move quickly around their communities in a way they want to. We've invested billions of dollars in upgrading the railroads that go to the far reaches of Long Island, up to Westchester, coming in from Rockland County, the Hudson Valley. How do you do that? You make them clean, efficient, longer, more comfortable, have signage that tells you electronically what time the next train's coming, and Wi-Fi capability so people can spend those hour or two or whatever doing work and counting that toward their workday. That's what's required. If you have the mass transit system, mass transit must work for the masses. It's that simple. And we also have transit deserts in our own city. When you look at where the subway system was built in New York City over 100 years ago, that's why it's so expensive to maintain. The transit deserts are typically in the poorer neighborhoods. I think that's intentional. These people did not have political clout. They didn't have elected officials saying, why not a station here? They were bypassed. In New York City, what we're doing to try and solve this, we're rehabbing an old 14-mile freight line. We're going to turn that into a commuter rail service that'll serve 40 million riders a year, connecting two boroughs, Brooklyn, home of many Irish, and Queens, home of many Irish, okay? They all want to get together and hit the pub at night, right? Why do they have to come into Manhattan first? So think of the logic of that. We connect them in their outer boroughs by just rehabbing an old rail line. It can be done, but someone had to look at that and say, why not? I said, why not? And we're going to get that done. That Interborough Express is going to now turn a 70-minute commute into a 35, 40-minute commute. That's life-changing for people. That determines where you're going. Well, I work there. I can do that now. I can make that happen. Similar project underway in Harlem. We're extending the 2nd Avenue subway. What has happened is people ignored an important part of Harlem. The people there don't have access to the good-paying jobs in lower Manhattan without a very lengthy, arduous commute and multiple buses. They were cut off from prosperity as well. We're going to fix that. It also means that we can make powerful changes in people's sense of identity and connection, bringing them close together. That's what cities are supposed to do. But also, mass transit in cities and all of our infrastructure must be built to withstand those 100-year storms that I've taken notice come every 2 years. Now, it seems like somebody owes me 98 years of not having to deal with this. I was governor literally 10 days, and we experienced 2 hurricanes. And I took note that that was more than Florida had that year, which is a little more known for hurricanes. So hurricanes hitting New York. We had an earthquake last 2 weeks, usually hits California. We had in the Hudson Valley, a 1,000-year rain event. I said, who is keeping track 1,000 years ago, just out of curiosity? Now, that's not that old here. I know that because I toured sites that go back to BC. But for us, that's pretty old. But we have to have adaptation and build the resilience to withstand the effects of climate change. Because this won't just determine whether people live in cities in 50 or 100 years from now. It'll determine whether or not there's actually cities 50 or 100 years from now, especially those along our vulnerable coastlines like New York City. So those areas are vulnerable. Superstorm Sandy inflicted significant damage to 2 major arteries that connected the entire Northeast railway system under the Hudson River. Damage done by a hurricane. And if that tunnel ever became impassable, it literally shut down the northeastern economy in America. So we have to build more. after decades of people not cooperating, not working together, I'm working with the governor of New Jersey, I'm working with the mayor of New York, I'm with the Biden administration, and we're expanding what is now going to be a connection between New York and New Jersey under the Hudson River. Modest price tag of $16 billion, but it would have been a lot cheaper if people had done it 15 years ago when it was first proposed. And I'm not going to wait till it's $32 billion in the future when at some point it is going to be compromised. We cannot take those risks. So again, I'm calling out to government leaders to anticipate the worst case scenarios that could happen to your city. That would cut us off. And do something now. Do something now. So we have created resiliency roadmaps. We're making, even with the subways, we had flooding in our subways, the water rushing down into the New York City subways just last year. We're lifting up the steps. We're building higher infrastructure around there to stop the stormwater from streaming into it, investing in drainage, elevating our bus depots and yards. This is urgent work. It's not the exciting work. It's not dramatic. But if you don't do this, heaven help you when the next storm comes and you say, yeah, we really should have done that. I felt better because we had a subsequent storm. We did not have the flooding in the subway that we'd had the year before in the same places with the same volume of rain. You can do something about this now. So we have to figure this out. And transitioning the world to clean energy is the first start of it. I don't need to spend a lot of time on this because we are making those transitions. We're bringing hydroelectric power, not just from Niagara Falls, which has been there for 100 years, but also from Quebec. We're talking to Ontario about other energy sources. We're talking about ways we can power more houses. We have power lines coming in from everywhere. Also, I'm very excited that 35 miles off the Atlantic Ocean, and you won't see this because the residents didn't want to see this, we're having new offshore wind farms. We just launched the nation's first utility-grade offshore wind, and we're just getting started. So this is going to power thousands of homes. Also, we're looking at how we construct buildings. In 2026, we'll become the first state to require that all new buildings run on electric heat instead of fossil fuels. That's in 2 years. That's bold. We have a lot of work to do, but if you don't set out bold benchmarks, then you lack ambition. You lack the audacious nature that you need to have to lean into these challenges. Older structures like the Empire State Building. Who's been in the Empire State Building? All right. It's being retrofitted now, and they're cutting their emissions in half. It's extraordinary what they're doing, showing existing buildings can take hold of their energy footprint and make it so many times better. And I know there's many sustainability and chief impact officers in this room, and I commend you for your work. Push harder, go faster, push your elected officials to do more and tell them the doomsday scenario, but how their name will be associated with devastation in the cities if they don't act now. Believe me, you'll get their attention. So state and local governments must also compel others to do their part. We're setting climate goals, we're cap and invest, dealing with climate aggression, climate pollution, making polluters pay for emitting greenhouse emissions. Yes. How about owning some responsibility for what you're doing to our environment? And what are we doing with the money? We're reinvesting in clean energy projects and giving money back to the ratepayers because the rates will go up. We cannot make it difficult for those who are having trouble making their bills now by this transition. Affordability within this green energy revolution must be part of it. As I've said all along, we are the first generation to really feel the effects of climate change, and we're the last generation that can do anything about it. And cities are vulnerable, but when they do build more resistant infrastructure, more resilient, and they can give people faith that they can handle this, when they make these massive investments in clean energy, they can chart a cleaner path forward. People have confidence then, confidence they can handle this. And some of the leading startup companies coming out of Ireland to the US are helping lead the way in New York and in Silicon Valley. They're not just transforming our economy, but they're also helping save our planet by bringing the innovation that came right from this great country over across the pond. Now, finally, we think about how we can use, how smart cities can do things differently. The Internet of Things, the way we've changed things, we regulate traffic. We can manage deliver services, water, so you could do that with the aid of technology that can power the right answers to the questions. And artificial intelligence. People are fearful of artificial intelligence. There is a dark side, no doubt about it. I will tell you this, in the state of New York, we are leaning hard into it because we believe that whoever owns this chapter of history will own it all. This is everything. This is the early stages of the internet. Look how transformative that was. So we will find the way to make sure we have responsible artificial intelligence, but we are going to democratize access to artificial intelligence in the state of New York, starting with connectivity. We have a program, and President Biden's administration has been very, very helpful to this. $1 billion to expand affordable high-speed internet access across our state. We're also telling providers you cannot charge more than $15 a month for people to have this access because otherwise it becomes a barrier. And we will not have a digital divide in our state. Secondly, I just secured $275 million coupled with private investment, $400 million for what we call Empire AI, first of its kind partnership to create one of the world's most powerful supercomputers and put it in the hands of our colleges and universities, not just the great private universities, NYU, Cornell, Columbia, and others, but also our public institutions. So what does that mean? The power that's only available to the large private companies right now will be in the hands of New Yorkers in a very short time. This is where the innovation powerhouses will come from. Students, researchers, bringing in federal dollars, collaborations with the private sector will solve society's problems. We'll lean into this power and become a more enduring, a richer state that sees all the challenges ahead, but uses this new innovation to help solve them. And so, don't be afraid. We'll figure that out. We need federal solutions to deal with the downside of it, but I think it's also a great opportunity to draw more people to our cities. Shakespeare once said, "What is a city but the people?" That was true then, it's true now. We love our cities, although it's hard to think of cities when I'm looking at this beautiful scenery. But I know this will always be here. It'll always be calling me back home. But cities give us that chance to be a congregating place for the most ambitious people, the most talented, the ones with the spirit. And we risk losing those people if we don't make our cities great. And we can solve these problems. I think that we can gather together. Forums like this set the stage, share ideas, bring more ideas to next year and the year after and the year after. We can make our localities and our cities in particular more livable, more affordable, more resilient. Because I believe there's no challenge that cannot be overcome. It is that eternal sense of optimism that's deep in my core that certainly must come from those risk takers in my family, just a few miles from here, who had the audacity to cross an ocean not knowing what lay for them on the other side. That's why I'm not afraid of these challenges. Truly not afraid. I know we can build more housing. We can unclog our highways. We can unleash new forms of mass transit. We can clean up our air. And we can fortify our cities from storms and pandemics. Cities will always be that magnet for people searching for adventure, a new life, a chance to live among the smartest, the most ambitious, the most creative, the true believers. That is the genius of cities. And it's up to us as the leaders of today, at this particular gathering, at this moment in time, to understand the power that we have, the power that we are compelled to use to make life better for others, especially those who live in our cities. It's up to us to ensure that the beautiful works of art, as described by Hugh Lane, continue to inspire others for generations to come. Thank you.